Hi, today we're going to learn about compound fractions. In this section, I will solve compound fractions in two different ways. So, compound fractions are very important in college algebra and calculus. I've tutored a lot of calculus students and pre-cal students, and a lot of them don't know or forgot how to do compound fractions. So, compound fractions is a must. It will not go away. So a compound fraction is a fraction with a compound fraction is a fraction expression with fractions in its numerator and denominator. So my first example, would be 1 over 3x squared divided by 10 over 5x, 5 times x times y. So let's actually do some problems. Okay, so my first one would be, let's do a simple one. So let's do 1 over x divided by 5 over 25. So I'm going to show you two ways, and then I will, you guys pick one way, but one way I really like to do is what's called the bracket process. So, okay, so we have 1 over x divided by 5 over 25. Do you see my numerator 1 over x? So my denominator is x. And then over the denominator we have 5 over 25. What is my denominator? 25. So what is my common denominator or my greatest number GCF? You have an x and a 25, so my greatest common denominator is 25x. So so now what I'm going to do, this bracket means you're going to multiply top and bottom by 25x. So what I'm doing is I'm going to multiply 1 over x times 25x. You know that when the x cancels, right? So you're just left with 25. So on my numerator, it's going to be 25. Let me look at my denominator. So now we have to multiply the denominator by 25x. So it's 5 over 25 times 25x. Do you know what happens to the 25? It cancels, right? So you're just left with 5x. This simplifies as 25 over 5 is 5, and then you're just left with x. So that's my preferred bracket way. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of the problem. So that was the first way. Now the second way, it's probably the most common way you've done before. We can rewrite that problem as 1 over x divided by 5 over 25. You can either cross multiply, right? Or what you can do is do 1 over x, flip this, so that's going to be 25 over 5, and then you're going to, instead of a dividing sign, it's going to be multiplication. And then remember, when you multiply across, so it's just going to be 25 over 5x, which is just 5 over x. So that's one way. That's the second way. So you guys pick one way you like, and then just stick with that. I'm just going to stick with the bracket because it's just much simpler and easier to do. So let's do another one. So let's do a more complex one. So we have a 2 over x minus 1 divided by 4 over x squared minus 1. Now this one is a little bit different from the first one because we actually have a fraction, like we're subtract. This isn't most simplified, so we gotta simplify this one. So let's look at the numerator. We have 2 over x minus 1. We're subtracting fraction, but we can't really subtract it because we need a common denominator. So this 1 or negative 1, we can rewrite it as x over x, because x over x is the same thing as 1. Now we can subtract fractions because we have a common denominator. See, we have an x here and an x here, so it's going to be 2 minus x divided by x. Now let's simplify the numerator. We have 4 over x squared minus 1. We are subtracting fractions, so we need a common denominator. So this 1, we can rewrite it as x squared over x squared because we need a common denominator, and x squared over x squared is the same thing as 1. So we can subtract this fraction, so it's going to be 4 minus x squared divided by x squared. Now we have a compound fraction. So I'm going to do the bracket way. Now let's look at our factors. We have an x here, and we have an x squared here. What is my GCF, or greatest common denominator factor? My GCF is going to be x squared, right? So I'm going to multiply this x squared over here, this whole thing, by this, and then multiply the x squared with this whole thing. So what I'm doing is, I'm doing 2 minus x divided by x times x squared. What's that going to be? So we know the x cancels, you're just left with 1. So you're just left with x times 2 minus x. So that's our new numerator. Let's figure out what is our denominator. So like I said before, we have to multiply top and bottom by this x squared. So it's like saying 4 minus x squared over x, times it by x squared. So what do you know about x squares? They cancel. So you're just left with 4 minus x squared. Now, I'm not going to distribute this x first because I'm going to figure out if something can be more simplified. So I think this is the most simplified it can be. Now let's look at this 4 minus x squared. This looks very familiar. This looks like the perfect square, right? The perfect square. So I can write 4 minus x squared as 2 plus x, 2 minus x. Now so let's look at our numerator, x times x, 2 minus x, and then on the bottom we have a 2 plus x times 2 minus x. So what can cancel? The 2 minus x, so you're left with just an x on the top, and then on the bottom you're just left with 2 plus x. So that's your final answer. Okay, so that was the bracket way, but you can also do it the other way. So you could have stopped right here and rewrite the problem as 2 minus x over x divided by 4 minus x squared over x squared. You could cross multiply, right? Cross multiply. Or what you can do is do a 2 minus x over x, change the sign, flip this, so this is going to be an x squared divided by 4 minus x squared, and then this divide sign is going to be a multiplication sign. So when you multiply across, it's going to be x squared times 2 minus x over x times 4 minus x squared. Let's see here. Now we can simplify that 4 minus x is a perfect square, so this is going to be 2 plus x times 2 minus x. What happens to the 2 minus x? They cancel. So you're just left with x squared over x times 2 plus x. Let's see, the x cancels, so you're just left with 1. So you have x over 2 plus x. So you get the same answer. So I just like the bracket ways because it's just simpler for me. But you don't have to. If you want, you could just do it the other way. Okay, now let's do another one. So let's say we have 1 over x plus h minus 1 over x divided by h. This is a compound fraction because this h can also be written as h over 1. So we have a compound fraction, but let's look at the numerator. It's not the most simple. We got to simplify the numerator because we are multiplying we want it in a simple fraction form. So we got to subtract fractions, so we need a common denominator. So we have an x plus h here and an x here. What is my common denominator? And please don't say x plus h. That looks very tempting, but it's not x plus 8. It's not x plus h as our common denominator. It's actually a combination of both x and then times x plus h. That's my common denominator for this part. Yeah, it's very tempting to say, oh, it's just x plus h, but it's not. So over here, what are we missing to get this? We are missing an x plus h, so we're going to multiply top and bottom by x plus h. Over here, we're missing an x, so we're going to multiply top and bottom by x. So I'll simplify it right here. So x times 1 is x minus, let's see here, I'm not going to distribute that negative yet. You know what, actually I can. So it's negative 1 times x plus h, so that's going to be negative x, and then negative h. So the x cancels, so you're just left with negative h. So it's negative h divided by the common denominator, which is x times x plus h. And don't forget about this thing, we haven't simplified this. So it's divided by, I'm going to make the divide sign really big, long, divided by h over 1. Now we have a compound fraction. What is my common denominator of this compound fraction? We have a 1 here and an x times x plus h. It's just x times x plus h, right? That's our common denominator. When you multiply negative h over x plus h, what happens to the x times h? They cancel, right? So you're just left with negative h on the bottom, on the top, and then on the bottom you're left with, you're going to have to multiply this by this, right? So it's going to be h times x plus h. I'm not going to FOIL it out because I want something to cancel before I FOIL anything out. So what happens to this h? The h cancels, right? So you're just left with negative 1 over x times x plus h. That's my final answer. You could FOIL this out if you want to. So let's do a last one. So this is my last problem. So let's say you have an x square over y squared minus excuse me, minus 1 divided by excuse me, x over y plus 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do is look at the numerator. So this whole thing is our numerator and denominator. I'm going to simplify both. It's x squared minus y squared. Now, how can I rewrite that 1? Because we're subtracting fraction, so we need a common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite that 1 as y squared over y squared. Because y squared over y squared is 1, and then you can subtract it because we have a common denominator of y squared. So it's going to be x squared minus y squared over y squared divided by the big one, big long divide sign. Now let's focus on the denominator. We have an x over y plus 1. We're adding fractions, so I'm going to rewrite that 1 as y over y. Now we can add that fraction, so it's going to be x plus y over y. We have a compound fraction now. We have a y here, and then a y squared here. So what is my common denominator of that one? We have a y squared. So what I'm doing is x squared minus y squared divided by y squared. I'm multiplying that y squared top and bottom by y squared. So what happens here? The y squared cancels, so you're just left with x squared minus y squared. Over here we have an x plus y divided by y times by y squared. What happens here? The y cancels, so you're left with 1, so you're just left with y times x plus y. Now, I'm not going to FOIL this y right now, but because I want to simplify it. So this x squared minus y squared looks very familiar, right? It's the perfect square. So I'm going to rewrite it as x plus y times x minus y divided by y times x plus y. What cancels? The x plus y cancels. So your final answer is just x minus y divided by y. That's your final answer. So yeah, this wraps it up for this section.